Hi there, I'm Clarence Waldron. Welcome back to Black Muse. Tonight's guest is noted music professor Dr. Tammy L.Kernodle from the University of Miami in Ohio. She's been all over the place as a music expert. She's been featured in New York Times. She's been featured in several documentaries, including one on Mary Lou Williams, one on Miles Davis, and of course, the most recent one, and the reason why we're here, on Ella Fitzgerald. She's going to talk about that in a minute. But she's also the author of the biography of jazz pianist Mary Lou Williams, titled Soul on Soul, The Life and Music of Mary Lou Williams. Before we get started, a little full disclosure. Me and the doctor professor, we were both featured on that Ella Fitzgerald documentary that the BBC produced. And I really loved how she talked and what she was saying, and she knew so much about jazz and that era and so much about Ella. I wanted to find her. I just wanted to find her. So here I am. I found her. So let her talk now. Hi there, doctor.
Hey, Doc. It's good to be here with you.
Absolutely. Thank you for being available. So let's start with the BBC film, A Life in 10 Pictures, Ella Fitzgerald. How did you get involved with that?
It was actually, I don't really know other than I just received this random email saying, we're doing this documentary on Ella Fitzgerald, and we know of you as a scholar, having written so much on women in jazz, and will you be willing to contribute to this? And so, I was just proud to contribute, but also to share the screen with you, brother, and bring some deeper awareness about, who Ella was as a person, but also as this great artist.
Now, I know the film has aired over in London. Do you have any idea when it might air here?
I don't know, and I'm hoping that it airs soon. I think there's such renewed interest in Ella now. There's a wonderful book out by author Judith Tick on becoming Ella Fitzgerald. You see reissues of her music, and I just think it's timely for this piece of wonderful historiography that was done in this film to be seen by multiple audiences.
Yes, yes. Now, you said in the film that Ella also understood the importance of quiet activism. What did you mean by that? What do you mean by that?
So in recent years, my research has expanded to include looking at the wider swath of music, and Black music in particular, that has centered around protest and civil rights. And that work for me has extended beyond, what we typically talk about in terms of the Black civil rights movement, which is the period of the 1950s to the early 80s. Um, I'm using in that work a framework that looks at the long civil rights movement, which is, kind of extending this conversation for us to look at the fight for civil rights in America as being encompassing of the full experience, whether that's from 1619 or from 1865 when emancipation happens. But the fact that there are these connected waves of activity. And so what my work is doing is looking at the culture that's centered around that. And sometimes we have activism that is very overt and very collective and very public. But then we also have moments of quiet activism that oftentimes goes unnoticed. And so we talk about Ella in particular. What's the quiet activism that Ella engaged in? Well, part of it is how she showed up as a Black woman, and being her true self, and never really succumbing to what are sometimes the pressures that are placed upon Black entertainers to kind of take on or to represent or to mirror what are these European beauty standards, right? So when you look at Ella, Ella looks like, you know, how many of our mothers and aunties and sisters showed up, glamorous in their full bodiness, unapologetic, right? The other part of her quiet activism had to do with who she employed. Like throughout her career, you know, there were Black seamstresses who made Ella's dresses, you know, and so she's engaged in this kind of Black economic, activism where she's pouring this music back into the community, who she hires, what she's doing. You know, she's also invested in the college education of young people. And so there were all these ways that she was investing in our community and investing in this struggle of uplift and advancement, but it wasn't in the same way that other artists who marched with Dr. King or might have been, you know, part of the Harlem Renaissance movement in particular overt and loud ways. So, you know, there's this kind of quiet activism that takes place sometimes in our communities that goes unacknowledged.
Exactly. And I'm thinking about that, the fact that she gave me the only interview that she had that day, quiet activism. As a matter of fact, you were speaking about that and it showed me and her together. Yes.
Yes,
Get that. Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly. The fact when you tell that story is so powerful, and how you tell that story, how she saw you, and she saw you in every aspect of who you were, and she gave that interview to you, not to, you know, who most people would have expected. And so, yeah, that embodies really who she was.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now you are University Distinguished Professor in the Department of Music at Miami University in Ohio. How would you describe your students? Because I'm sure to be in your class must be a big deal.
I would hope it would be. It's surprisingly, most people will be surprised to know that the majority of the population of students that I deal with are non-music majors. I deal with only a small population of music majors. And that is because unfortunately, many of my classes are still not major requirements. And I teach the full spectrum of Black music there. This is the beginning of my 27th year. Um, so I've spent a great deal of my life there. And from the very beginning, when I was hired by someone who had vision, who said, look, you do Western European music great, but you have this knowledge in Black music. That's what we do not have. Create a program. And we created this litany of courses. And so I deal with students who major in business, who major in English, kinesiology, and health. And and I have music education majors, music performance majors that sit there. But the majority of the students that I work with are either coming to this class because they want a knowledge of Black music, or they want to really enhance their knowledge of Black music. Some of them are simply trying to take a course to fulfill the general education, but I will tell you, in the 27 years that I've been here, I have dealt with some remarkable students who, don't look like me, but leave that class knowing how to talk about Blackness in a different way, knowing how to talk about Black culture in a different way, to develop an understanding of just how our sound is so connected to our identity, and the knowledge of that can bring deeper understandings of how we can engage with one another. And so I have been exceptionally proud to do that kind of work, because I feel like I have been able to make arts advocates and ambassadors for people who don't major in the arts, but now know the value of the art because they have sat in my course. I mean, I have literally had, my brother, students who have emailed me like after 5 or 10 years to say, you know what, I just want to apologize. I wasn't engaged in your class, but what I walked away with has served me. And I'm such a fan of jazz. I'm such a fan of this, and I have a different perspective about hip hop culture. And so, that's what resonates with me. And that's why I've never been really bothered by the fact that, maybe I haven't produced PhD students like some of my colleagues, or this. I've produced a body, I hope, of well-informed um, young people who can perhaps be the agents of change in our world as we move forward.
Got it. Let's go to Mary Lou Williams. What
Mhm.
inspired you to write the book on her life and music?
I had no intentions on writing a book
Oh,
on her life and music. I
really?
I tell you, yeah, you know what? I had conceived of writing a series of articles, but never a real book. In my love for Mary Lou started in graduate school, like right when I was transitioning from the master's program into the PhD. I started taking piano. I didn't have any aspirations to be a jazz pianist, but it was an area of music I had not really had any close proximity to or any performance experience. So I enrolled with piano lessons with Hank Marr, very famous, a Hammond B3 player out of Columbus. And took a semester with him. He was like, you need to listen. You don't know, I play gospel. So, I'm trying to fudge these gospel chords as jazz chords. He's like, you need to listen. And that's how I discovered her. And then long story short, I really got interested in her religious compositions. That really kind of resonated with me, this intersection of jazz and spirituality, because that was kind of where I was in my own, personal development. And so my dissertation was really on her masses and really looking at what they meant in that time period as advancing a different type of Black spirituality and music.
Mhm.
And then, through a course of events, I just really felt like I wanted to write a book that didn't situate Mary Lou so much in about personal relationships and personal failures, but to really try to contextualize what was her overall kind of historic significance in the spaces that she operated in, and also the different ways in which she conceived jazz, right? And was performing jazz and composing jazz. And so, as much as I thought I was done with Mary Lou was not done with me.
Okay. 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 Does she have family at all? I mean, at
Mhm.
this, oh, so I mean, who's alive? Who runs the estate or whatever?
So there are two foundations now. So there's the Mary Lou Williams Foundation, which Mary Lou started before she died. Um, and so there's a confluence of people that work with that. But her existing family members, so she has family on both sides, on her mother's side and on her father's side. And much of her family on her father's side is in the Deep South. But she has a niece that lives in Pittsburgh, still lives, and she is the daughter of Mary Lou's youngest sister. Um, and then all of her children and so forth and so on. So they actually run another foundation called the Little Piano Girl. And so what they are looking at is ways of celebrating Mary Lou and continuing her legacy of community-based activism and education in Pittsburgh in
Hmm.
particular. So that foundation had its official public launching this past spring with a series of events in Pittsburgh. But yeah, she has a vast array of family that is still active and living.
Right. When you think of her, what were the biggest challenges that you think that she faced in her lifetime?
I think part of it, was centered on her being Black and being a woman. I think also trying to navigate a industry that did not always see um, the true depth of her artistry. I think there were many times when Mary Lou was slightly above the curve And because of that, she wasn't able to really find traction in terms of success. And by the time that the world was catching up with her, she had moved on to something else. Like, she, to me, charted so many um new ways of not just performing jazz, but thinking about jazz and thinking about its history. But she was a Black woman who didn't have a lot of business acumen, and and she was balancing that role of being nurturer and mentor, and oftentimes to her own detriment. But I really think it was an inability to really grasp what this Black woman was trying to do, and not having a stable band in the way that Ellington did. I think if she had had the kind of network of musicians in the way that Ellington did for all of those years, we would talk about her the same way we talk about him.
Yeah, yeah. Um, let's go back to your childhood in Danville, Virginia. Who inspired you as at a young age to dream big and to reach big, and here you are now today? You know what I mean? So who were your early role models? Or maybe your parents, or well, go ahead, please answer.
I think it very much started at home. My mother and my father, gave myself and my siblings the love for music because my dad sang all the time. My parents loved music. Their record collection was very vast. But I think also the intellectual side came from my mom. She was the kind of person that during summer months we went to the library and picked out books, but you had to write a report on your book. You had to give a report on your book. So there was very much this idea that you're going to college or you're going to work, but this is the way you're going to carry yourself. And I want you to know that the world is open to you. And that was very important for me because Danville was the site of a very bloody civil rights battle. SNCC came to Danville in 1963. I was born in 1969. So I grew up in the residuals of that movement, because that movement did not resolve itself easily. It didn't end in the 60s like some of the others. And so, if you can imagine going to kindergarten in an integrated class, and just all of the dynamics of that kind of post civil rights, living in the South and the New South. There were all of these opportunities that were offered to me, but my parents were like really the foundation of this. Your world doesn't have to be little. Your world doesn't have to be centered around these things. And I think it was just a blessing that that they were not parents that said, oh, you can't do the art thing. You have to do business, so you have to do medicine. And, so they cultivated that. So I started piano when I was 3 because my paternal grandmother played piano. And like everyone on my father's side was an organist, a piano singer. And
Wow.
so there was an expectation as the oldest child, the first child, you're going to play. And I didn't want to play. And that was a
Mm.
battle. And, so I went through a series of teachers. But also, I want to just say one of the critical memories that I have in terms of music is that Camilla Williams, the opera singer, would often come back home. She was from Danville, and she would sing in some of the churches, or she would give concerts. And so I grew up in this world of music that was so vast and rich. So hearing everything from what we would think of as bluegrass music, Black people playing that kind of music, and white people, to gospel and classical music and soul and funk that I was, buying for myself, and hip hop when that came. So, music was everywhere, and no one was really saying to me, you can't do anything with that. That's not going to take you anywhere. So it was really nurtured by a whole, ecosystem of people that really implanted in me that I could do more, even though my parents didn't go to college. Their friends, the people I went to church with, they all really pressed upon me, you know, uh, to think big. and even if I failed, at least I tried. And so, my mantra then and even now is I never wanted to live a life of woulda, shoulda, coulda, and so the thing is, even if you fail, you try. And so you don't have this questioning, that's kind of heavy in your mind.
Yes. You are a music scholar. I mean, your education, music. You have
Mhm.
your bachelor's from Virginia State University in music. You have your PhD and your master's from Ohio State in music history.
Mhm.
Did you think that all of that would work in your favor? I'm sure you did. You had to believe that you would do something with all that education, all that rich education.
I did. I will tell you, I went to college thinking that I would be a concert pianist. And that lasted for a hot minute, when I realized I didn't have the physicality to be a concert pianist at what was being signified as that. But I really didn't have the stomach for it, and so I shifted in wanting to be an educator. Um, but then, other doors started opening for me. So I will be honest with you, when I decided to go to Ohio State, I was shifting gears into musicology because I wanted to change some conversations. I sat in many classrooms, and Black people were not necessarily always invoked in those classrooms. Even though Virginia State's an HBCU, we rarely really talked about Black composers, and we couldn't play gospel music in the practice rooms and things like that. And I understand that now. They were trying to prepare us for a white world, right? Black musicians to engage in a white world. So I wanted to change those conversations. That I experienced the same thing when I was in at Ohio State. But what I was also affirmed in my work at Ohio State, because I went over to the Black World Studies department and to American history and to women's studies. So where I did not get a grounding in Black music in the music department, I got a grounding in history and culture and theory. And I would write these papers on Black musicians in these courses on like Black political thought. That's the first time I wrote about Nina Simone, was
Hmm.
in that class. And so, I went in with a purpose. I'm not going to lie to you. When I made that shift and decided I was going to move somewhere where I totally knew no one, and I was going to pursue graduate education, which my parents were not happy about, because they thought I had made up musicology. I knew I had to be grounded. And my grounding was to do a few things. I wanted to change the way Black people were talked about in classrooms in terms of Black music. I wanted to produce actual material culture so that people could stop saying that there was no real material culture on Black music, because I had professors who told me that Black people didn't
Really?
write music down. And yeah, I mean, like, and those things became the kind of ignition points, the fuel for me to do the work, right? um and I really wanted to shape what we hear in the concert hall. So I went in really goal directed, and it was more outside of me than it was inside of me. It wasn't about me being famous. It wasn't about me, having certain coveted jobs. I just wanted to do the work. And that was to tell our stories, to elevate our music, for people to see us as the intellectuals that we are.
Wow. I heard you on the podcast, More Than Rhythm, I think it was called. And you said something that really stuck with me. The church is the essence of everything I am. Can you go on with that? I love that. That says everything. It says
Yeah.
everything. But
Yeah.
please tell me again.
So, I mean, part of that is the spiritual aspects of the church, right? And so, it is that the nurturing environment of the church that allows us to, if we're lucky, to really come into a full sense of who we are as Black people, right? And it allows us to heal from the spaces that we navigate that oftentimes chip away at our spirit. So for me, the church has always been the spiritual base, and not in the most conservative, dogmatic ways that people think of the church, but in the redemptive, restorative, transformative ways that the church was when we didn't have buildings and we were in, brush arbors, and we went there to sing our way back to humanity. That's where the church has been for me. But it also was very much a training ground because there was an expectation how you carried yourself. So, people will often talk about the way that I articulate ideas or thoughts. And that happened in the church. You had to stand up and say something. You had to read the announcements. You had to pray, and that's where I learned how to manage meetings. That's how I learned how to navigate personalities, that so the church was so many aspects of learning and knowing for me. And I feel like I carry it in everything that I do, and even how I embody myself. And I'm not talking about like clothing and things, but how I embody myself as a spiritual being and as an intellectual being.
Wow. Okay. Now, I was surprised to learn that you are also a singer performer. What inspired that? Where did that come from? I learned that from the podcast, but teach me, show me what happened. Yes.
My daddy. My
Okay.
daddy, and you growing up in a singing environment, like the earliest sounds of my day, depending on where I woke up. If I woke up in my parents' house, it was AM radio. So I
Okay.
heard the Carpenters, I heard Johnny Cash, I heard, James Cleveland. If it was in my maternal great grandmother house, it was hearing her sing spirituals, hearing her sing gospel song. And my maternal great grandmother, who is pictured right here, you can't see her, is my closest link to slavery because her parents were former slaves. So if you can imagine having your entire life someone who is a direct link to slavery, and so that's being conjured up for you in her singing in the morning, playing, making breakfast, that's conjured up in her stories, and she's telling you about her experiences and all of these things. So I just grew up in this world where it was just music everywhere. And so just as quickly as I was learning how to play the piano, I was also singing in church. So my parents actually have pictures of me as like 4 and 5 years old, singing in the adult choir, not the children's choir, the adult choir, right? And so like I think I probably sang before I talked, before I actually started speaking. I'm gonna ask my mama that when I talk to her later. But so, and that was just nurtured. That was nurtured. We sang all the time. It was music all the time. And then I have two brothers that are younger than me, so then it was competition. Who gets the piano first, you know? And we still
Okay.
go through that now. We still go through that now as adults, and so that it was just nurtured. It was nurtured in me. And you were told if you had that gift or you had that talent, that you used it. You were not arrogant. You used it for the sake of the community. I can't tell you how many times I got smacked in the back of my head in church, because somebody got up to sing and didn't have a musician. And, I didn't move fast enough for my mom to get up to the piano to go up there and pick them up. Right.
All right now.
So, so like I existed in a sphere where I could read music, but I also had an ear. So I could, pick up that. So at age 14, hear me, I was a full-time minister of music. I
Okay.
I had a cousin who got sick, and they asked me to be a replacement, and I was the minister of music till I left for college. And then even in the summers I would come back and play for them. And so I continued that even in college, I played for so many different denominations. I played for Catholic churches. I was like, and so I learned to develop, all these musical styles in terms of that. But like many people, I became self-conscious, right? And so I became very, very, um, I became very aware of the strength of my piano playing, but I would question my vocals, right? And I would say, I'm kind of a singer, and people would always pull me into situations where I would have to perform. But I don't play for churches full time now, but I still, occasionally play for them, and playing, being able to play to sing is the way that I get into the music that I often write about.
Okay, okay. Now, isn't there a certain group that you're involved with or you were involved with? She sang Freedom or something like that?
Yeah, so
I
that
know.
was my making. That was something I created.
Oh,
So long story short, in the midst of writing this current project on civil rights, um, I hit an emotional wall. I started that project around 2012. And, there was Trayvon Martin, there was Tamir Rice, there was
oh,
Sandra Bland. So there was such an intersection of the historical past stuff that I was reading and the stuff that was happening in real time, that I just developed this emotional block and I couldn't write. And I could write everything else, but literally could not work on that book for like 2 years. And so I got a call from the National Underground Railroad Museum here in Cincinnati. And one of the curators said, I really would like for you to come in, if you could do a lecture, but not just a lecture. Can you do a lecture performance? I know you sing and play. And I came up with this thing, and initially I was calling it Everybody Sang Freedom. And so I already had this little three-piece band I was playing with, right? I had a drummer that was a former student, a bass player I had met in the church, doing the workshops in the church. And so we had played a couple of club dates. We came together and I just created this like 40-minute kind of lecture performance where I moved from like spirituals up to, like kind of Nina Simone soul music, right? And people started taking clips, like during the performance, people were like recording clips and putting it on Facebook. And
right.
so people started reaching out to me. And so I rebranded it as She Sang Freedom, and then from like 2018 to 2020, we were literally like getting dates all over the country. We were going on to college campuses, public schools, and just performing this, that really looked at how Black women from Harriet Tubman all the way up to the 1970s had kind of used music to kind of initiate these moments of protest. And I mean, we did everything from Strange Fruit to I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free, Roberta Flack's Trying Times. I curated like a body of like 12 songs that I could move through different iterations. And I mean, it really kind of exploded. And then COVID happened.
Right.
And so we had not done it. And then all of a sudden got this invitation from Columbus Museum, Columbus, Georgia, Columbia, South Carolina, excuse me. And that was the first time I had done it in years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. I know we're pressed for time, but I got to ask you this next question. Who is on your playlist? Because I know that it could be Beyonce, Taylor Swift, it could be Aretha, it could be Nina Simone, Roberta Flack. Who is on, or Ella Fitzgerald, who is
Yeah.
on your personal playlist?
Who's on my playlist? So
Yes, yes.
any given day, any given time, I will tell you last night I was listening to kind of more contemporary R&B. So it started with Maxwell's cover version of Al Green's Simply Beautiful. And
Yes.
then I just let Spotify kind of do its thing. And so I was listening to Denard Burton, a whole lot of people, but it just depends on the mood. I listen to a lot of jazz. I'm trying to keep up with contemporary jazz. I loved Cowboy Carter because I'm a
Mm,
Southern girl, and so so many of those things spoke to me in so many ways, and the layers in which she's done, she does that. But this morning, I'll tell you what I was listening to.
okay.
Shaft. I was listening to the theme from Shaft. I was listening to the theme from Sweet Sweetback's Badass Song.
Ooh,
Because tomorrow I'm teaching the unit on Black soundtracks and Black exploitation movies. I'm teaching a class that's looking at Black music and Black consciousness from the age of Black power to the election of Obama.
mm,
So we are looking at those films as a way of understanding how the ghetto, how Black urban identity, but actually how funk and soul become and gospel become part of this marking of sonic Blackness. So I'm all over the place, dude. I'm not an easy
I
person to
know,
ask
I
that
know,
question.
I know, but it's all music, music, the whole spectrum of music. Long as it's
Yes,
good music, long as it's
yes,
good. Yeah,
yes, it is.
yes.
Yes, it
Okay.
is.
What's next for you? What else are you
Hmm.
working on now that we can look forward to seeing down the line?
Well, of course, the book. I'm hoping it's going to be the first of three books, looking at Black women and protest music. Yeah, I pulled the jazz women out because I think they need their own attention, and classical women like Margaret Bonds and Undine Smith Moore, and because no one really talks about how Dr. King used classical musicians and composers in the movement to really to tap into a whole nother demographic. I also curate a Black music festival in Miami, Florida. I work with New World Symphony, which is a orchestral fellows program, but it's also a working orchestra. And they came to me 4 years ago after the death of George Floyd and said they were not doing enough. And they didn't want to just do concerts. They wanted to educate their fellows about Black music and Black culture. So I've been working with them for 4 years. We have a festival called I Dream a World. Every year is a different theme. This year we did Mary Lou's Harlem. So we
Wow.
did and it's a whole series of concerts. We did her Zodiac Suite. We did parts of her masses. We did some of her chamber pieces. Um, we actually premiered the last piece Mary Lou was working on before she died, that was recently rediscovered. And so next year we're doing some Julia Perry, but every year I'm working with them to bring Black musicians and Black music to their concert hall there on South Beach. So yeah, so getting that third part of that piece of that journey I was telling you about, that goal is changing what people hear in the concert hall. So I've been blessed enough to now have that ability to create, these concerts that now people know in February, there's going to be 2 or 3 weeks. And but that's an anchor point for what they do for the remainder of the season.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Mm. All right. Anything else you'd like to share? I know that I picked your brain. Anything else? Anything else left to say?
No, I just want to thank you. Thank you for your work. Thank you. Thank you for your continual your advocacy of us, but also your work in preserving. I feel like we're in the same business. You see yourself as a journalist, but you don't know how valuable those interviews, like what you did with Ella, and your writing, feeds the work that I do and people like me do. So thank you for what you have contributed to preserving and telling our stories.
I thank you as well. But
Mhm.
listen, before we leave, I want to acknowledge Howard Sandifer and his wife, Darlene Sandifer. They are the founders of the music school, the Chicago West Community Music Center, that is celebrating its 25th anniversary. And this whole video podcast was their idea. They said, let's have lively conversation with some of our favorite newsmakers. So that's you. So anyway, I
Oh,
just want to thank them publicly for what they have been doing for a long time.
yes, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for continuing to invest in our community. we need that kind of grassroots infrastructure. So I thank you.